Ilara's breath came in shallow gasps as she tightened her grip on her child, feeling the chill seep into her bones. Her eyes blurred with the cold, and every step she took felt heavier than the last. The wind howled around them, biting into their skin like knives. The planet, once a place of vibrant life, had become a frozen wasteland. It had been years since anyone had seen the warmth of the sun here. The once thriving world of her people now lay dormant under a blanket of snow and ice, a place where survival had become a daily struggle. She stumbled forward, her limbs stiff from the cold, but she refused to stop. She couldn't. Not while her child was in her arms. "Stay close," she whispered to her little one, her voice cracking from exhaustion. The child, no more than 3 cycles old, clung to her tightly, their small body wrapped in the last of the furs she could find. They were both starving, and Ilara could feel the weight of hunger pressing on her chest, but she pushed it aside. There was no time to think about that now. Every corner of her mind screamed at her to rest, to close her eyes and let the cold take her. But she couldn't. Not with her child in her arms. She had made a promise to protect them, no matter what. She would keep that promise, even if it meant her life. The wind howled louder, and she could feel the snow shifting beneath her feet. It was as though the planet itself was trying to swallow her whole, burying them both under layers of ice. But Ilara refused to fall. Her people were strong, resilient, and she had to be strong for her child. She took another step and then another, pushing through the darkness. Her vision blurred again, and this time, she couldn't fight it. Her legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed to the ground, her arms still clutching her child. "Ilara?" a voice whispered in her mind, but it wasn't her own. It was as if the wind itself had spoken her name, urging her to keep going. But her body was too tired. The cold was too much. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of her child against her chest, and then the darkness took her. The world around her faded completely. The last thing she felt was the pressure of her child's small hands clinging to her as though they knew the truth before she did. Ilara drifted away into nothingness, the cold wrapping around her like a final embrace. When Ilara opened her eyes, again the first thing she noticed was the absence of the biting cold. The air was warm, unnaturally warm. It filled her lungs with life-giving oxygen, and she gasped as she tried to sit up. But something was wrong. Something wasn't right. She looked down and realized that her child was no longer in her arms. Panic surged through her, and she struggled to sit up, but her body was too weak. "Where?" Ilara's voice was a whisper, but there was no one to answer her. She could feel the softness of something beneath her, but when she tried to focus, everything around her was still a blur. She blinked, trying to make sense of the surroundings. She was no longer outside in the freezing cold. The air around her was warm and filled with a soft, sterile smell. A strange hum filled the space, almost like the sound of machinery. As her vision cleared, Ilara saw something, or rather someone, standing at her side. A human. He was tall, with short brown hair and a face weathered by time. His clothing was unlike anything she had ever seen, sleek and functional, made of materials that seemed far more advanced than anything her people had ever known. He looked at her with a mix of concern and determination, his eyes soft but focused. "You're safe now," the human said, his voice calm and steady. "We're on my ship, you're going to be okay." Ilara blinked, still disoriented, and tried to sit up fully. Her body screamed in protest, but she ignored the pain. She had to understand what was happening. Her thoughts swirled in confusion. The human stepped closer, offering her something to drink, but she flinched away from him, instinctively recoiling. The last time she had trusted an outsider, it had nearly cost her everything. "No," Ilara said, her voice hoarse. "Where is my child?" The human's expression shifted, and he nodded toward a small cot across the room. There, curled up, under a blanket, lay her child, safe, sleeping soundly and untouched by the dangers of the planet they had just escaped. Ilara's heart surged with relief. She couldn't believe it. They were alive. She hadn't failed them. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling as she watched her child. The human gave her a small, reassuring smile. "I couldn't leave you out there," he said. "I'm Captain Jared Kane, and you're safe now." Ilara's mind raced. She had heard of humans before, of course. They were a legendary species known for their strength and fearlessness. But she had never imagined meeting one. And now here she was, on their ship, alive. She didn't trust him, not fully, but she couldn't deny the feeling of safety that seemed to surround her. For the first time in what felt like ages, she felt a flicker of hope. "I am Ilara," she said softly, "and this is my child, Cora." "Ilara and Cora," Jared repeated, his tone warm. "It's good to meet you both. You've been through a lot." Ilara didn't know how to respond. She had no idea what would happen next. She only knew that they had been pulled from the edge of death. She looked back at her child, watching the steady rise and fall of their chest, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, Ilara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Ilara slowly settled back onto the soft-cushioned bed as Captain Jared Kane watched her closely. Her mind was still reeling from the shock of waking up in an unfamiliar place. A ship, human-made, she could tell by the sleek and smooth surfaces that surrounded her. The warm, breathable air felt like a foreign luxury, so different from the freezing, suffocating atmosphere of her home planet. Cora, her child, was safe beside her. Ilara's gaze often drifted toward the small cot, where Cora lay bundled up in blankets. The child's peaceful expression made Ilara's heart ache with love, but it also made her worry. Her life had been filled with struggle, with moments of terror and uncertainty, and she didn't know how long this fragile safety would last. "Is this real?" Ilara's voice was barely above a whisper, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar room again, as if searching for any sign that this wasn't a dream. Captain Kane didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step back and gave her a moment to collect her thoughts. He was trying to gauge her reaction. She had been through so much, and he didn't want to overwhelm her with too many questions or explanations just yet. "You're aboard my ship," Jared finally said, his voice calm and steady. "It's a safe place, I promise. I found you. On the surface of your planet, your world wasn't safe. The storm was getting worse, and I didn't think you'd make it through the night." Ilara blinked, trying to piece together the fragments of the conversation. The last thing she remembered was the cold, the bitter, unrelenting cold, and then darkness. She had closed her eyes, expecting to never open them again, but now she was awake, alive, and safe. The sense of disbelief was overwhelming. "World," she began slowly, as if testing the words. "It is dead. My people are dying. My family is lost." Her voice cracked as the weight of her past settled in. Her home planet, once a thriving hub of life and culture, was now a frozen wasteland. The storm had come suddenly, an unnatural force that no one had anticipated. The cold was unrelenting, and those who hadn't already fled to other worlds had been forced to fight for survival. And in the end, it wasn't enough. Jared didn't speak immediately. Instead, he walked over to a small control panel by the wall and adjusted the settings. The soft humming sound in the room shifted, and a gentle light illuminated Ilara's face. She felt her body relax at the warmth that surrounded her, but her mind remained alert. "I didn't know what to expect," Ilara said quietly, her eyes now focused on the human captain. "But I didn't think you would help us." Jared took a deep breath, as if carefully considering his next words. "Not all humans are the same. Some of us don't see others as enemies. I know your kind has been through a lot, but I believe we can help each other." "Help?" Ilara repeated, her gaze narrowing. "Why would you want to help us? We've never been allies to your people. Your kind has always been too distant, too indifferent. Why now?" Jared didn't flinch. He was used to the suspicion in others' eyes, especially from those who had suffered as much as Ilara had. "I'm not asking for anything in return," he replied simply. "I'm a scout, part of a mission to explore new worlds. But when I saw your child out there in the cold, I couldn't just leave. Not when I knew I could save you. Ilara's eyes softened for a moment as she studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but there were none. His expression was sincere, and that only confused her further. She had been conditioned to see strangers as threats, especially those from other races. The galaxy was filled with those who would use her people's weaknesses against them. But this human, he was different. I don't understand, Ilara murmured, the confusion thick in her voice. It's not easy to understand, Jared said, stepping forward, his voice gentle but firm. But you're safe now. That's all that matters. We'll get you and your child to a place where you can rest, recover, and start again. Ilara let out a quiet, incredulous laugh. Start again? She whispered, almost to herself. My world is gone. My people are scattered. And now you want me to start again? Jared's gaze softened and he lowered his voice. I know it's hard, but it doesn't have to be the end. There are other worlds out. The steady hum of the ship filled the air as Ilara slowly adjusted to the new reality. She sat on the soft bed, feeling the warmth of the room seep into her bones. The past few days had been a whirlwind of emotions. Confusion, fear, and slowly, a sense of reluctant hope. She didn't know where they were heading, but she knew it wasn't the icy, desolate world they had just escaped. Cora slept soundly beside her, wrapped in soft blankets. Her small form curled up peacefully, as if unaware of the terrifying storm they had just survived. Ilara gazed down at her child, a mixture of love and sorrow washing over her. Cora was the reason she kept fighting, the reason she refused to give up, even when the cold and hunger threatened to take them both. Ilara's thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps approaching. She turned to see Captain Jared Kane walking into the room, a small, kind smile on his face. He looked much like he had before, calm and steady, like someone who had seen it all but remained unaffected by the chaos of the universe. Hey, Ilara, he said softly, his voice filled with quiet concern. How are you feeling today? Ilara hesitated before answering. She still didn't know how to feel. The shock of everything, the cold, the near death, the rescue, had left her emotions in a state of constant flux. But she was alive and her child was safe. That alone made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. She started slowly, trying to find the right words. I'm still adjusting, but I'm okay. We're both okay. Jared nodded, understanding. It's a lot to process, I know. But we're headed toward a place where you and Cora can rest, recover. A peaceful world. It's not much, but it's safe. Ilara's eyes flickered with a mix of curiosity and caution. A peaceful world. She had heard about places like that in stories, but she never believed they existed. Her people's world had once been full of life, full of hope, until it all came crashing down. The storm had taken everything. And now she was supposed to believe in the possibility of a new life? I don't know what to expect, Ilara admitted, her voice soft. My people. We were never meant to survive. We were always weak in the eyes of others. Jared took a step closer and sat down on the edge of the bed. Ilara, I've seen a lot in my time, and I've met many different species. Your people aren't weak. The storm, well, that wasn't something you could control. But you're strong. I can see that. I can see it in the way you protect your child. Ilara met his gaze, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. But there was nothing there but kindness. She couldn't understand it. Why would this human care? Why? Would he risk everything to help her and her child? I don't understand why you're doing this, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Why would you help us? We're nothing to you. Jared looked down at his hands, a quiet contemplation settling over his face. I guess you could say it's because I don't believe in leaving people behind. No one deserves to be alone, especially in the universe we live in. I'm not a hero, Ilara. I'm just someone who believes that every life matters. Alara didn't know how to respond. She had spent so long hiding from others, distrusting anyone who came near. Her world had taught her to be cautious, to survive at all costs. But now, in the safety of this ship, with her child asleep beside her, and a human offering kindness, Alara was forced to confront the truth she had buried deep inside her heart. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope. "I wish I could believe that," she whispered, looking down at her child again. "But my people, my world, it's gone. It's hard to believe in hope when everything you've known is lost." Jared was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "You don't have to believe in it right away. Just take one step at a time. Rest. Recover. When you're ready, we can figure out what comes next." The room fell quiet as Alara looked out the window, her thoughts racing. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time since, she had closed her eyes in the cold on her home planet. She wasn't consumed by fear. There was a strange sense of peace in this moment, as fleeting as it was. She didn't know if she could trust this human, this Captain Jared Kane. But for now, she was willing to try. For Cora. For herself. The next few days passed in a blur. Alara spent most of her time resting in the warm cabin, trying to recover from the exhaustion that had consumed her during their long, desperate journey on her frozen planet. Cora continued to sleep soundly, occasionally waking up to eat or play with the small toys Alara had been able to scrounge together. But for the most part, the child remained blissfully unaware of the chaos that had torn their world apart. Jared and Commander Lila continued to check in on them, offering food and supplies, but Alara kept her distance, still unsure of how to trust them. She had spent so long guarding herself and Cora from the dangers of the universe, it was hard to let her guard down, even for a moment. But slowly, the humans' kindness began to chip away at her walls. They didn't ask for anything in return. They didn't make promises they couldn't keep. They simply offered their help, their companionship, and for the first time in her life, Alara began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more to this universe than just survival. On the 5th day, Jared came to her with news. The ship was nearing its destination, a peaceful, habitable planet where they could rest. It wasn't much, but it was enough to offer them a chance at a new beginning. "We're almost there," Jared said, his voice filled with quiet optimism. "You and Cora can start over. You can be free of the cold, free of the past." Alara looked out the window again, her gaze lost in the stars. She didn't know if she was ready for a new life, but she couldn't ignore the faint glimmer of hope that had started to grow inside her. She took a deep breath and looked at Jared. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Jared smiled, his eyes filled with understanding. "You don't have to thank me, Alara. This is what people do for each other. We help." And for the first time in a long while, Alara allowed herself to believe in that simple truth. The days aboard the human ship passed more slowly than Alara had anticipated. She had expected the warmth and safety to feel like a dream, but instead it settled into a new rhythm, a daily routine that, while unfamiliar, began to feel comforting in its own way. Captain Jared Kane was always nearby, often checking in on her and Cora, offering a kind word or a small gesture of support. At first, Alara had kept her distance, as she always did with strangers. She had been hurt too many times, lost too much, to simply open herself up to someone she didn't fully trust. But little by little, something began to change. One morning, as the sun of the distant galaxy filtered through the windows of the ship, Alara found herself walking the narrow halls, Cora cradled in her arms. She had taken to exploring the ship more frequently, though still hesitant to venture too far. The ship was large, and though it felt like a home compared to the frozen wasteland she had escaped, there was still so much she didn't understand. As she wandered, she found herself outside the ship's observation deck. The door slid open with a soft hum, and Alara stepped inside. The vast expanse of space stretched out before her, an endless sea of stars twinkling against the blackness. She had seen pictures of space before, heard stories of distant worlds, but nothing compared to the sight before her now. She stood there for a long moment, feeling a strange sense of awe mixed with sadness. She had lost everything, but in the midst of that loss, she was given something she never expected, a chance. The cold, frozen world she had once known was gone, but now, there was the possibility of something new. "You're getting the hang of this ship," a voice called from behind her. Elara turned to see Jared standing at the door, a soft smile on his face. He had a warmth about him that, despite the coldness of space, made her feel safe. "I've been trying to explore," she said, glancing out the window again. "It's hard to believe I'm even here." Jared stepped closer, his hands folded in front of him. "It's a lot to take in, I know. But you're safe now, Elara. And you don't have to be alone anymore." Ilara's heart gave a strange, fluttering jolt at his words. She had never had the luxury of depending on someone else. Trust was a difficult thing to earn, and in her experience it was far too often broken. But there was something about Jared's sincerity that made her want to believe. "It's just—" Elara trailed off, her voice quiet. "My people, we were always alone, always fighting for survival. We never had the chance to trust anyone, to work with others. It feels strange being here." Jared nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand. But sometimes, the greatest strength comes from opening up to others, from trusting that not everyone wants to hurt you. I know it's hard, but you're not alone now." Elara looked down at Cora, who was asleep in her arms, oblivious to the weight of the conversation. She gently brushed a lock of hair from her child's face and let out a deep sigh. "I don't know how to let go of the fear," Elara admitted. "It's always been there, always pushing me to survive, to fight for every breath, for every moment. I don't know what it means to live without that." Jared's eyes softened as he regarded her. "I can't pretend to know what it's like to go through what you've been through, but I do know this. It's okay to let go of that fear. It's okay to trust again. I'm here to help you. We're here to help you." For the first time, Elara let herself truly hear the words he was saying. She had spent so many years alone, so... Days turned into weeks, and the human ship steadily made its way toward the distant planet where Elara and Cora might begin anew. The journey had been quiet for the most part. The hum of the ship's engines, the calm atmosphere of the crew, and the safety of the vessel had slowly given Elara a sense of peace she had never experienced before. But despite the comforts, there was still the nagging feeling in the back of her mind. The fear that this safety, this peace, could be taken away in an instant. She was too familiar with that. Elara spent her days in the observation deck looking out at the stars. Her thoughts wandered between the possibilities that lay ahead, starting fresh, away from the cold of her world, away from the pain of her past. She had long ago lost her home, but she was beginning to wonder if there was a chance to rebuild. For Cora. For herself. But even as hope began to take root in her heart, there was still a deep, unresolved fear that kept her awake at night. The universe, after all, was vast, and there were many dangers lurking in its endless stretches. What if they weren't safe after all? What if this peace was just an illusion, and there were forces out there that would tear it all apart? As if on cue, her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden urgent sound of the ship's alarms blaring. Elara's heart leapt into her throat, her instincts immediately kicking in. She didn't need to know what was happening. The feeling was all too familiar, the chaos, the fear, something was wrong. "Elara," Jared's voice crackled through the intercom, calm but urgent. "Stay in your room, we're under attack." Elara's breath caught in her chest. She glanced at Cora, who had woken from the noise and was now looking up at her with wide, frightened eyes. Elara quickly scooped the child into her arms, her heart racing. She wanted to believe this was just another false alarm, a glitch in the system, but she knew better. There were always enemies lurking, waiting to strike when least expected. Without thinking, Elara rushed out of her room, moving toward the main hall. She had no plan, no idea what to do, but instinct drove her forward. She needed to protect Cora, and she needed answers. As she moved through the narrow corridors, she caught sight of Jared, who was sprinting toward her, his face set in grim determination. "Stay close to me," he said, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward an emergency shelter. "It's going to be okay, but we need to get to the safe zone." "What's happening?" Ilara asked, her voice tight with fear. She could feel the rumble of the ship's systems shifting as the alarms continued to blare. "Who's attacking us?" Jared's eyes hardened. "We don't know yet, but we're being boarded. I need you to stay in the safe zone with Cora until it's over. We'll handle this." Ilara's mind was racing. Being boarded? That could mean any number of things, but none of them were good. The only thing that mattered right now was keeping Cora safe. She had to trust Jared, at least for now. But as they made their way toward the shelter, a new thought hit her like a thunderclap. What if the attackers weren't the only danger? What if there was someone on board who had betrayed them? The thought seemed far-fetched at first, but the more Ilara thought about it, the more it made sense. There had been subtle signs, small things she had noticed, things that didn't add up. And then it hit her. Commander Lila. Lila had been so kind, so welcoming, but something about her didn't sit right. Ilara hadn't voiced her suspicions to Jared or anyone else on the crew, but she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that had been building inside her since they boarded the ship. Could Lila be involved in this attack? Had she been working with the attackers all along? "Jared," Ilara said suddenly, her voice urgent. "What if it's someone on the ship? What if we've been betrayed?" Jared stopped in his tracks, his face showing a flicker of surprise. He hadn't considered the possibility of internal sabotage, but the idea didn't seem entirely impossible. "I'll look into it," he said, his tone serious. "But right now, I need you and Cora to get to safety. Don't worry about anything else." Ilara nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She had learned the hard way that trust could be easily broken. She couldn't afford to let her guard down now, not when her child's life, and her own, was, on the line. The safe zone was a small, secure room in the heart of the ship. It was designed for emergencies, a place where the crew and passengers could take shelter during an attack. Ilara, still holding Cora tightly, entered the room and quickly sealed the door behind her. She could hear the muffled sounds of blaster, fire, and the distant thrum of engines as the ship's defense systems kicked into gear. She didn't know how long they would be trapped in this room. All she could do was wait. And as she paced the small space, the doubt in her mind grew stronger. What if she was right? What if Lila had betrayed them? Ilara couldn't ignore the pieces of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. The way Lila had always been just a little too friendly. The way she had conveniently disappeared during some of the most critical moments. The longer Ilara thought about it, the more convinced she became that there was something to her suspicion. She knew she had to be careful. If Lila was involved, confronting her too soon could be dangerous. But she couldn't wait forever. She needed answers. Time passed slowly in the safe zone. Ilara tried to comfort Cora, who was beginning to fuss, sensing her mother's anxiety. Ilara held the child close, her heart racing with worry. She couldn't afford to let Cora see her fear. Not now. Finally, after what felt like hours, the door to the safe zone opened with a soft hiss. Ilara tensed, her eyes darting toward the entrance. Jared stood there, his expression grim but determined. "Ilara," he said, his voice low, "it's over. We've repelled the attackers, but there's something you need to know." Ilara's pulse quickened. "What happened? Who were they?" Jared stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. His eyes met hers with a look of quiet resolve. They were mercenaries hired by someone on the inside. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. "Inside? You mean?" Jared nodded. "Yes. It was Commander Lila." Ilara's heart sank. She had known it. Lila's actions had always been too convenient, too calculated. The pieces were falling into place, and the truth was more painful than Ilara had imagined. "But why?" Ilara whispered, her voice shaking. "Why would she betray us?" Jared's face darkened. She had her reasons, But I'm afraid it's not over yet. Lila isn't the only one. There are others on the ship who were involved, and they won't stop until they get what they want. Alara felt the weight of his words settle heavily on her chest. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. The danger wasn't just external. It was internal as well. But even in the face of this new threat, Alara knew one thing. She wasn't alone anymore. Jared had promised to protect her and Cora, and for the first time in her life, Alara believed it. Together, they would face whatever came next. Together, they would survive. The calm that had settled over the ship was shattered the moment Jared revealed the truth. Ilara's mind raced, trying to process everything he had said. Commander Lila, someone she had come to trust, was part of a conspiracy, a betrayal that threatened to destroy everything. Her thoughts were clouded with a mix of disbelief and anger. How could Lila have done this? Jared, sensing her confusion, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I know this is a lot to take in, but we don't have much time. We need to act quickly before things get worse. Ilara nodded, trying to steady herself. She had always been good at surviving, at keeping her emotions locked away, but this was different. This was a betrayal she hadn't seen coming, and it hit harder than anything she had faced before. Cora, sensing the tension in the room, began to whimper, her small hands reaching up to Ilara for comfort. Ilara picked her up gently, holding her close. She couldn't let Cora see her fear. Not now. Jared, Ilara said, her voice steady but filled with concern. What do we do now? How do we stop this? Jared's expression hardened. We need to find the other members of the crew who are involved in this. Lila is just the beginning. We'll need to take control of the ship if we're going to make it out of here alive. Ilara took a deep breath. She had never been part of something like this. She had always fought to survive, to protect her child. But this was different. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was fighting for Cora, for their future. And she wasn't going to let anyone, especially not someone she had trusted, take that away. Where do we start? Ilara asked, her voice determined. We have a plan, Jared said. But I need you to stay close to me. There's no telling who else is involved, and we can't trust anyone on this ship right now. Lila had a lot of influence, but we've already begun taking back control. The key now is to find out who else is working with her. Ilara nodded. She wasn't sure how they would manage, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to sit by and wait for someone else to fix this. She had to be part of the solution. Jared led her down the narrow corridors of the ship, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. Ilara followed closely, her senses heightened, every part of her on edge. She had no idea who to trust anymore. The walls seemed to close in around her as she thought about how easily Lila had deceived them all. They reached a small command center, a place that Ilara had never seen before. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and they stepped inside. A few of the crew members were already there, working quickly to monitor the ship's systems. Jared,